Welcome to our July all-volunteer Fair Districts Huddle. We love to meet with you all, and we're excited to be here together. This evening, we are going to talk about the decision, SCOTUS's decision in Moore v. Harper, and the impact that that will have on future redistricting reform. We have Dan Vicuña from Common Cause National, and we are actually going to meet Becky Harper, which is very exciting for many of us, the Harper of Moore v. Harper. And then we're going to talk about the impact in Ohio and what's next for our Ohio cases, Huffman v. Neiman, and we are going to meet Neiman of Huffman v. Neiman. So it's kind of a pretty exciting evening. And then, of course, we're going to talk about issue 1 and getting out to defeat issue 1. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn you over to Dan Vicuña, the National Redistricting Manager from Common Cause National. Dan.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. I just want to give a little background on Moore v. Harper and then tell you about the amazing decision, the victory that we won. Moore v. Harper comes out of a congressional gerrymander in North Carolina, blatant gerrymander to give Republicans far more seats than their vote totals would justify. We challenged that in state court, making an argument that such an egregious partisan gerrymander violated the state constitution. Initially, we won in state court, won in the North Carolina Supreme Court. Legislators who were unhappy about that decision went to the U.S. Supreme Court and made a radical legal claim. It's hard to even justify it by calling it a theory, but for shorthand, we'll call it the independent state legislature theory, in which they argued that state courts have no authority to provide any oversight into what legislators do, the rules they make for federal elections, that in this case includes passing the most egregious gerrymander may possibly in the country, and could have included many other rules for any kind of federal election. So the Republicans argued at the U.S. Supreme Court that legislators basically have superpowers to do whatever they want when it comes to federal elections. Fortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected that notion out of hand. Go ahead, Mia, if you want to move it one forward. In no uncertain terms, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision that included, obviously some of the Republican-appointed justices, authored by the Chief Justice, affirming that state courts do in fact have a role to play in protecting the voting rights of the public, and that includes striking down egregious gerrymanders, determining whether they violate state law, that power still resides in courts, in state courts. Go ahead, Amy, if you want to move one forward. In case there was any lack of clarity on that, the Supreme Court said it several ways. Really affirmed that when it comes to creating congressional districts, state legislators, again, do not have just superpower to do whatever they want to violate the voting rights of one party's voters. The claim came out of the Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution. This initial radical theory was rejected out of hand. Again, state constitutions create legislatures. So, of course, legislatures are bound by those constitutions, and the final arbiters of those constitutions are state courts. And so state courts remain an essential protection for voting rights when it comes to our federal elections. So just a resounding victory for voting rights in Moore v. Harper. And it has some other positive consequences. You can go ahead and move one slide over. The court affirmed several checks and balances, and this was really the argument that we made. And our advocate, you may see him on MSNBC. He's a pretty well-known contributor on legal issues. Neil Katyal, former Solicitor General of the United States, was our advocate in the U.S. Supreme Court. Watching him prepare for oral arguments was really fascinating. Just a brilliant guy fighting for the right cause, and he did an amazing job. And this was the result of it, along with our amazing legal team at Southern Coalition for Social Justice. The court reaffirmed, obviously, like I mentioned, state judicial review of what legislators, the rules they make for federal elections. It also ensured that or reaffirmed the rights of voters to referend maps. Often you'll see states have the power to take a map to the people and give it an up or down vote. reaffirmed a governor's veto. If you read the independent state legislature theory, as literally as the other side wanted us to, or wanted the court to, even a governor's veto would have been at risk. So the court made sure to reaffirm the governor's power to veto where that's in the states where that's relevant. And finally, something that, may be relevant to a state like Ohio that has an initiative process, the power to create independent redistricting commissions through the initiative process, going over the heads of legislators and making constitutional changes needed to protect voting rights. So just a sweeping victory for us and for voters writ large. Go ahead and move to the next one. Just to dig a little bit into the sort of what the consequences are of this win, what was initially at risk. You have pretty robust state judicial review, or the opportunity to engage state courts in protecting voting rights in places like Ohio that give an explicit power that explicitly empower state courts to get involved and reject maps. Other states, there are 28 states that have free and fair elections clauses. We're starting to see that weaponized for the forces of good. You had state courts in Maryland and Pennsylvania strike down congressional maps based on free elections clauses. In other states, just in the last few weeks, the state Supreme Courts of Alaska and New Mexico have interpreted their equal protection clauses, basically, very, very similar to what you see in the 14th Amendment of the federal Constitution. State constitutions, many of them have those as well. Those two state Supreme Courts interpreted their equal protection clauses to prohibit partisan gerrymandering. And again, finally, the power to create redistricting commissions. You've got, I think, about 19 states that have a ballot initiative option, and that remains a weapon that the public can use to find alternative ways to draw districts, take that power out of the hands of self-interested legislators. So we're just thrilled about this victory. It was a tough road to get to, but there was some infighting even amongst the plaintiffs about whether to even move forward with this case because of the threat of the independent state legislature theory. But we were at oral arguments. We saw how it went down. We saw that we had history, the law and logic on our side, and we won. We couldn't be happier. So I'm happy to take questions at that period.
Wow. That's wonderful. I like your term, a weapon for good. I think we're all looking for those. So there is one question in the chat already, Dan, which Janice was asking, what was the basis for the 3 no votes?
The dissents argued that the case was moot. So unfortunately, on a federal level, we got entirely good news. On a state level, it was a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow, because initially, like I mentioned, we won in the state Supreme Court. The North Carolina State Supreme Court struck down the congressional map as an illegal partisan gerrymander that violated state constitution. And then an election happened, and Republicans took control of the state Supreme Court, won a majority. And in a real slap in the face to precedent and stare decisis, just a few months later, reversed course and stated that policing partisan gerrymandering was not something that the state courts would be allowed to do. So they, kind of rejecting their own work just a few months earlier, and rejecting what is an increasing, I guess, empowerment that state courts are feeling to do something about this problem. So they reversed course. And then there was a discussion in the U.S. Supreme Court about whether the North Carolina Supreme Court, rejecting its initial decision, and then deciding to uphold the maps, whether that mooted this case. And that's what it kind of alluded to. Some debate within the different plaintiff groups about whether to move forward with the case. One of our co-plaintiffs, one of the more partisan ones, decided to even go to Twitter to argue back against us. But initially, like I said, we realized that this needed to be decided well in advance of the 2024 election. And we believed after hearing oral arguments that we could win. So we made the case to the Supreme Court that they should hear the case regardless. It wasn't moot. And that turned out to be the right call.
Awesome. There's 2 more questions. First from Catherine, asking, what is your view of the court's statement that it's possible to review whether state Supreme Courts have gone beyond the bounds of normal judicial review?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been some discussion amongst kind of, election law litigators, scholars about whether that means anything. I mean, federal courts our view is that federal courts maintain the same power to address egregious overreach by state courts that they have always had. In that small section at the end of the opinion, they did not articulate a new standard. So we don't think that there's any new rule of law that would make it any easier for federal courts to interfere in the work of state courts in protecting voting rights. If we're wrong, we'll be ready to fight. We litigate these cases all over the country, and if we have to, and we've litigated in the Supreme Court before, and if that section does actually mean something, is meaningful in some way, we'll be ready for it. But our view is that it was a sweeping victory that threw out independent state legislature theory, tossed it in the dustbin of history, and we're really grateful for it.
And I will ask you now, of course, we're going to talk later about the specifics of what's going on in Ohio, but as far as this decision is concerned, if it had gone the other way, what would have been the implication for Ohio? And now that it went this way, what is the implication for Ohio in terms of our future options?
Yeah, I mean, it may have had an impact on current law in trimming the ability of the Ohio Supreme Court to address a partisan gerrymander of the congressional map. There was the court in the last redistricting cycle did an important job of striking down congressional maps that it saw as clearly in violation of the state constitution. And I think that power could have been trimmed had the decision gone the other way. Now, under current law, it remains. The court can still play a role in policing those gerrymanders. As for the future, Ohio is a ballot initiative state, and what we've seen around the country is that legislators guard the power to gerrymander districts quite jealously, and generally our greatest success in taking that power from them is going over their heads and going straight to the ballot, collecting signatures, knocking on doors, and winning on election day. And so that option to do something, be it banning partisan gerrymandering, creating an alternative body like an independent commission, some sort of reform that would improve the process in Ohio, remains on the table thanks to this decision.
Yay. Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Dan before we move on? John Bazar, how do we prepare for the next actions of the Republicans who we can bet are going to try again? Well, I think we will address that. I mean, I think Dan kind of addressed it already in that maybe our best weapon for good, as he put it, is the initiative process. And for that, of course, we have to win in August. So that's our main, our next barrier and our next hurdle and our next goal. But I am going to go on. Thank you so much, Dan. We appreciate that. And I'm going to introduce Becky. And I have a little bio here. She's been a real estate broker in Raleigh since 1994, and she serves on the board of directors of Common Cause North Carolina. She's lived in many fascinating places and has been named plaintiff in 2 gerrymandering lawsuits and as a respondent in Moore v. Harper. So welcome, Becky. I'm actually going to stop sharing for 1 sec. Sorry, sometimes this is a little awkward. I'm going to replace the spotlight and hopefully everyone can see you now. So tell us, first of all, how you got connected with Common Cause.
My story started about 15 years ago. I actually filed a complaint. I literally just wrote a letter to the Board of Elections because I was very upset about what the realtors were doing with my dues money. So it was essentially a campaign finance complaint. They were taking our mandatory dues money and spending it on a political effort, which I didn't agree with them on, and I didn't think I should be forced to contribute. So I wrote a letter to the Board of Elections, and it provoked a lot of interest. It became kind of a test case. And all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, I had advocates, including Common Cause, coming to my defense. So there was a big hearing at the State Board of Elections on my case, where I actually won, except for within weeks, Citizens United happened. And so it became a moot victory. But Common Cause and Democracy NC and a lot of other good government groups got involved with my effort against the realtors. And so that's how I met all of those good people and became a supporter and an activist. And then about 5 years ago, they asked me to join the board.
Awesome. And was part of, where was the interest in redistricting specifically? How did that come about?
Well, I've always been interested. I am a bit of a political junkie and was aware, North Carolina, I'm not a native North Carolinian, like almost, 60% of the people who live here. I migrated from somewhere else. And I was very nervous about moving to the South back in the 1990s. And, but, North Carolina was a progressive Southern state. Anyway, I've been very comfortable, very happy living here, but things have begun to slide in the other direction in the last decade or so. And so we have an extremely powerful state legislature here. We do not have the right to citizen initiative here. The legislature has gradually been stripping the governor of the powers that he had. At one time in North Carolina, the governor could, in fact, veto maps. They took that authority away from him, and they are in the process of trying to take away his appointment authority over boards of elections and the university system and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So we have already a constitutionally very strong legislature, and they are usurping more and more power to themselves. And first and foremost among that, of course, is to protect the supermajority that they have in the legislature through gerrymandered districts. So they had a two-prong approach last year. They tried to flip the state Supreme Court in the elections in November, and they filed Moore v. Harper, which was kind of an end run, a Hail Mary pass with a what some considered, cockamamie legal theory. They went down both paths simultaneously because that demonstrates how important the districts are. I mean, it's all about how the lines are drawn before anybody casts ballots. So that's where the game is won or lost. And they were determined to protect their majority, which they really cannot win in a fair election in a purple 50-50 state. Wow.
I'm sure everyone on the call is feeling your pain. We know about some of that stuff. So how did you become a plaintiff in this redistricting case? Or I guess in the...
So yeah, the first case was in 2019, a case out of North Carolina called Common Cause v. Rucho went to the US Supreme Court. And in that case, the opinion written by John Roberts said, oh, this is a state issue. There's nothing in the federal constitution that protects voters, yada, yada, yada. But various state constitutions may speak to this, so they kicked it back to the states, something that the Supreme Court's very fond of doing these days. So when that happened, then our state legislature, of course, drew gerrymandered districts, and Common Cause and other partners decided to sue again and in state court, and plaintiffs were recruited. So they wanted a roster of plaintiffs from around the state representing various potential congressional districts. And I filled out their requested questionnaire. So I was recruited as a plaintiff, is the honest answer. Interestingly, my name, there were a group of plaintiffs and my name was put first. It is not alphabetical. I believe someone made a decision because I live here in adjacent to Raleigh, our capital. I have a flexible job. I'm not afraid of the cameras. I'm willing to get up and talk to people. And so my name was put first and here we are.
Very exciting.
Yeah,
And so did you go to the hearing on December 7th last year?
I did. It was a big deal to try to get a seat. The National Redistricting Foundation, Eric Holder's group, of course, one of the important partners in this effort, they were the ones who secured a seat for me. So that was very exciting. I'd never even been inside the Supreme Court chamber, even as a tourist. So it was great. I sat in the pews and listened. I am not an attorney. Much of the argument was way over my head. I was shocked that I don't think they even used the word gerrymandering once. They talked about the Articles of Confederation and British common law and a whole lot of down in the weeds things, references to, prior decisions and so forth that I am not an expert at or on, but it was interesting to be there. And as Dan said, Neil Katyal was super impressive. We had been told that each side would have 45 minutes. The part that is amazing to me about a Supreme Court case is that these guys get up there and argue without notes. I mean, he is standing with a podium and no notes, and they're throwing questions at him about this decision or this statute or the whatever, and he has got to know the details of the brief and so forth without looking at notes. It was pretty impressive.
I mean, even listening, it was incredibly impressive. I'm sure it was even more so to be there. So yeah, we had a listening party and there were so many of us on, and yes, it was very impressive. So what might you have noticed being in the room that we couldn't see?
It was very interesting. I mean, obviously there were a lot of famous people in the pews with me, J. Michael Ludig and Amy Klobuchar and others. The room was full of people that I recognized who, don't know me, but that was, fun. And the dynamic among the justices was fascinating to watch, the interplay between the justices and the attorneys. I think your audience, my impression was that, Alito is a cold fish. He leans back in his chair, looks down his nose, doesn't really smile. And I was surprised at how pleasant and congenial that Justice Thomas was. Very, very friendly, quite the banter and repartee with Neil and others. Just an all-around nice guy. And that, of course, might not fit our stereotype.
Well, someone in the chat has just said, this is literally the closest we'll all come to being in the Supreme Court. So we appreciate these inside views. So what was it like waiting for the decision?
Oh, well, we didn't know. And then when, of course, our Republican group here, they were successful in flipping the court. And so then when we went back to court here in March, and that was just a perfunctory exercise. I mean, our Supreme Court literally did not even allow our lawyers to make their case. They just peppered them with a lot of down in the weeds questions. They kept saying, I'd like to make my presentation and then I'll be happy to answer your questions. They had no interest in hearing the case, ruled very quickly to overturn what the prior court had done just 6 months earlier. So that was really frightening. What we didn't know was what then the Supreme Court would do. So as Dan mentioned, they asked for briefs from all of the parties who were involved as to whether the case should be dismissed or not. And it was quite interesting to find ourselves on the same side as the Republicans, because that doesn't happen very often. So as Dan mentioned, common cause, but interestingly, the General Assembly, our legislative Republicans, all their briefs argued that the case should be decided. But many of our partners were very concerned about this court and the way things are going generally. And they did, our legal champions, the people who have argued our case in state court, in Harper v. Hall and Harper v. Lewis, they felt very strongly that we should punt, that we should live to fight another day and not take the risk of the Supreme Court ruling against us. So that was interesting. Didn't know until the decision was released whether the Supreme Court was going to dismiss, which they could have done, or they were going to decide the case. So so I found out when my phone started blowing up, and like many others, I'm sure.
And what did you do to celebrate?
Well, I talked to a lot of reporters on the phone, and other than that, we didn't. I mean, it's sad, but we haven't had like a common cause group party yet. So I can't really give you a good answer on that, but it's very exciting. I've heard from lots of people that really I haven't been in touch with for years. I'm gratified to say that even though my name is somewhat public now, I've had no harassment. Nobody sends me nasty messages or anything like that. And a lot of people, people I sold a house to in California more than 30 years ago send me this nice note and said, I can't believe I saw you on TV. So that's been kind of fun.
Wow, that's so wonderful. Well, it's really fascinating to talk to you and hear about that case from the inside of that. Luckily, we're all celebrating, and it's a great outcome. And I think that will have an impact on Ohio as well. So we appreciate you coming to join us. Does anyone have any other questions? I kind of haven't seen any specific ones in the chat, or there's some we should bring up. Well, if it's okay with you, we will move on to our Ohio situation, but we thank you very much.
And if it's okay with you, I'll stay and listen because I'm very interested, and thank you to everyone here for all the work you're doing, because it's going to be a long road for all of us and we all need to engage. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And I'm going to attempt to find my screen here. It does this thing where it hides the bar. I need to move the bar. There we go. Awesome. Excellent. All right. So now we're going to move on. I'm going to introduce Colin, and Colin Marazzi's Deputy Policy Director of ACLU Ohio. And I'm going to ask him to tell us about our situation here in Ohio.
Well, thank you, Mia, and thank you everybody for joining us on a work night. And thank you to both Becky and Merle for sharing this evening with us. It's great to be here and hear firsthand how you have navigated these impactful cases. So I want to take a little bit of time and turn back to see how the Huffman or the Harper decision impacts our case here. And to start, we'll begin with kind of a recap of the court case that was in front of the Ohio Supreme Court, which was Neiman v. LaRose. This was the challenge to our second iteration of our congressional map. As we know, I'm sure by now, the first congressional map was ruled an unconstitutional gerrymander, and then it was kicked back to the General Assembly for a redo. They did nothing, and then the Ohio Redistricting Commission ended up drawing the second congressional map. That map was passed on March 2nd, and the Ohio Supreme Court ruled again that that second map also was a unconstitutional partisan gerrymander. And they cited Ohio's very explicit anti-gerrymandering and county splitting rules as their justification for why they ruled it to be unconstitutional. The plaintiffs in this case submitted a enormous volume of expert reports and data simulated maps that demonstrated empirically that the maps created by the Redistricting Commission were statistical outliers, extreme outliers of what a neutral map drawing process would have created. This is why, at the outset of that map, it was predicted, there were 3 solid Democratic seats, 10 solid Republican seats, and 3 toss-up districts. Now, Democratic candidates went on to win all 3 toss-up districts in the 2022 election. However, that does not negate the fact that this map was designed to cement extreme partisan advantage on behalf of candidates of the Republican Party. And I want to pull one quote from Justice Donnelly, who wrote the opinion in the first congressional case invalidating the congressional map, directly alluding to the new rules for line drawing and county splitting in our state constitution. And he said, the permissive splitting allowed in our constitution does not allow for partisan splitting of our counties. So I took that as a main takeaway and a main justification for their ruling. So what happened following the second congressional map being invalidated? Senate President Huffman and then House Speaker Bob Cupp took their time in dragging out their appeal, but they ultimately did end up appealing this decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, making the same allegations that the members of the North Carolina legislature made in Moore v. Harper, saying that the Ohio Supreme Court violated the Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution by effectively supplanting themselves as the line drawing body for federal elections. They invoked the independent state legislature theory, and they asked the U.S. Supreme Court to essentially roll our case in with Moore v. Harper. That did not ultimately happen. However, it was still, and as we'll get to here in a moment, it was still kind of set aside, and Moore v. Harper was used as the vehicle to answer this independent state legislature theory question. Once Neiman v. LaRose got to the U.S. Supreme Court, it was renamed because the parties had changed. It was no longer Merrill Neiman and a host of other plaintiffs suing the Ohio Secretary of State. Now it was Senate President Huffman suing the Ohio Supreme Court's decision in Neiman v. LaRose. So that is what transferred the name to Huffman v. Neiman. So Mia, you can go to the next slide. And Huffman v. Neiman, though we watched it with bated breath for months in front of, while it was sitting in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, it never actually had any action in front of it. Like I said, the U.S. Supreme Court kind of let it sit to the side while they handled Moore v. Harper. However, on June 30th, 2023, the last day of the U.S. Supreme Court's term, they issued an order on Huffman v. Neiman. And this order is called, if you're a litigator and you do this stuff for a living, it's what is called a GVR, a grant, vacate, and remand, which is essentially, we grant your petition for certiorari, meaning we decide to hear your case, we vacate the lower court's judgment, and we remand this case back to the lower court for further action. And this is actually a quite common order when you have multiple cases kind of dealing with the same subject. It's kind of a recognition that, hey, we answered this question in a different case, so we're going to essentially kick y'all back to your state court and have them kind of do a recheck to make sure their original order is in line with what we just decided. In this case, with what we decided in Moore v. Harper. So the ball now is really in the Ohio Supreme Court's court, for a lack of a better phrase. And it's really kind of unclear how they'll proceed. There is a ton of discretion as to what the Ohio Supreme Court may do. The only thing we do know is that they have to do something. The original judgment that rendered the second congressional map unconstitutional has been vacated. It does not exist anymore. So the Ohio Supreme Court must do something. However, and this is where things may take a turn for the worst, frankly, should the Ohio Supreme Court have a faithful adherence to their past precedent, the letter of our Constitution, and the spirit of our Constitution, and when reflected in our anti-gerrymandering rules, they should come to the same result, or they should at least admit that their previous ruling in Neiman v. LaRose is in compliance with the ruling of Moore v. Harper. And I say that because I have a quote here from Justice Kavanaugh in his concurring opinion in Moore v. Harper, which he says that a state court has the authority to review state drawn congressional maps. However, judicial review does not allow for impermissible distortion. That is the phrase that he used, an impermissible distortion of judicial review to alter what the legislature does. Now, some I have heard have alluded to kind of what Dan mentioned earlier, how other states have relied on free and fair elections clauses, equal protection. Some I've heard argue that relying on those more general, more vague, more kind of all-encompassing clauses of their state constitutions could be subject to further challenges because they really don't deal specifically with partisan gerrymandering. They're kind of broad concepts. In Ohio, however, we have explicit, descriptive criteria when it comes to fairness and ending partisan gerrymandering in Ohio. So we do not anticipate the Supreme Court of Ohio ordering the congressional map, saying that I guess the previous court overstepped their bounds as it relates to the independent state legislature theory. What we are concerned about is that they will decide to rehear the case on its merits and essentially say, in effect, what North Carolina Supreme Court did, which was, you know what, we're going to rehear the old case and we're going to change our decision. As we all know here, the 3 justices that dissented in all of our redistricting cases remain on the court. Former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who was the swing vote, is off the court now. So the makeup of the court is different and not in a good way. So we are really fearful that essentially Ohio will follow the playbook of North Carolina. And in fact, Senate President Huffman has already made public statements to the fact that they are considering petitioning the Supreme Court for a rehearing. Now, we don't know if that's going to happen. That is subjective speculation. However, we must, we will be following this closely because, again, the Supreme Court of Ohio must do something as it relates to our congressional case. I also included a couple key quotes I thought were important here at the bottom in terms of how future federal courts were directed by the Supreme Court to intervene in state and congressional redistricting case, or I guess I shouldn't say state, but just congressional redistricting cases. They say that state courts are not unbound. They do not have free reign to change congressional maps. However, again, they do retain the right to review them, and also that there is not a new standard. So though Moore v. Harper was a success story, was a win, a capital W win, I believe that we will see in the future kind of, cases now to determine where is the line in the sand going to be, because the court did not answer that question. They did not draw the line in the sand. They left it to interpretation. So though we won the war, I think there are future battles that are going to be waged on this issue. And with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Colin. Yeah, there are a few questions in the chat. I mean, I think John Gray, we've kind of hit on that. I mean, the court is different now. It's very different. And so that is, I think Colin has addressed that, and it's a shame. It would be wonderful to have the Moore v. Harper decision and then go back to our same Supreme Court that we had before, but unfortunately we don't have that option. And I don't know if, Colin, you want to look at the questions from Bob Brown just quickly, because we're running a little bit. Yeah.
So Bob, to your second question about, is it possible the Republicans could redraw the map? Absolutely. They are required to. We are not allowed to have the same maps for 24 as we did in 22. So they certainly can. We expect them, frankly, to begin redrawing maps in September, perhaps even a little bit before. I do think that, what we're going to want to watch is, are they going to kind of go for broke to redraw the maps for them to be worse? Or are they going to kind of settle for certainty, accept the 10-3 map with, with 3 competitive seats, and just try to win those competitive seats? We don't really know. What we do know is that candidates like certainty. They like being able to plan ahead. And I don't know if they are willing to go through a whole new redraw process where they'll have to determine all new districts, potentially make candidates move. That is yet to be seen. But stay tuned, because in a matter of not too many months, we're going to be back in the middle of this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Colin. We appreciate that. And now I'm going to introduce Neiman. Very exciting. I think this is a picture of Merrill early voting today at Franklin County Board of Elections with that nice long line outside. Everybody go in and do what Merrill does. That's excellent. A little bit of her bio. This is shortened. She's a recovering attorney turned entrepreneur, writer, and grassroots political organizer. I think many of you may know her from OPAL, which is the Ohio Progressive Action Leaders, which is a kind of a coalition of other grassroots groups around the state. And many of us work with her in that capacity. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and put a spotlight on you. And Merrill, tell us, how did you end up as a named party in that first case?
Yeah, so gosh, it's been several years now, or a few years now, but I think that actually it was through Sue Dean, who's an organizer in the Cleveland area. And I can't remember how she had been targeted to be one of the named plaintiffs for the state redistricting challenge, but she had. And for some reason, they were looking for someone specifically within the 3rd Congressional District, which I never fully understood. But so that's how they came upon me. And then the original cases were filed with Bennett as the lead name. And then for each sort of new iteration of the cases, they wanted to have a different person sort of at the top. And they just reached out to me about the federal challenge and asked if I would be amenable. I had some worries, like, Becky mentioned about my name being out there, but my name's already out there, that I figured whatever hit I was going to take, and I haven't received anything with respect to the redistricting cases.
And was it, we all want to be in a case that's called, our name v. LaRose. That must have been kind of fun on some level, right?
It was fun. Yeah, it's wasn't necessarily my original, dream as a law student that I would be a plaintiff in a Supreme Court case, as opposed to, being a litigator who tries arguing in the Supreme Court. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's, it's been a great experience. The Elias law firm is the law firm that my case has been associated with, and they've been really great about keeping the plaintiffs up to date and sharing pleadings and filings and answering questions when I had questions, because I was a little, probably a little more interested maybe than they had been hoping from a plaintiff, but they were always willing to answer any questions that I had about strategy, and their work was incredible. So I was always very impressed with their briefs and their arguments.
Wow, that's so great. And so you did feel like you got some inside information in terms of their strategy and that kind of thing?
A little bit. I mean, predominantly through update emails, as opposed to what do you think we should do, Meryl? But if I did have a question or a suggestion or something like that, they were always very responsive.
That's awesome. And so, what are you hoping now? I mean, given this situation in Ohio, are you looking for this case to be kind of wrapped up quickly, or like, what do you feel about next steps than what's going on?
So I was disappointed that the Supreme Court made the decision that they did, that they could have, chosen not to accept cert, or they could have, not returned it to the Ohio Supreme Court. It's hard not to be very cynical, understanding that we now have a Federalist Society essentially controlled US Supreme Court, that they chose to backdoor this back. I know it's a common legal practice, right, to send these cases back, but at the same time, there's really nothing that the state Supreme Court needed to do given the decision in Harper. So it's concerning that it opened up an opportunity, and now we also have a state Supreme Court that has, those members now in the majority have shown themselves to be unconcerned with following our Constitution or basic legal principles. It's a disturbing trend across the country, right? What they're experiencing in North Carolina, what we're experiencing here, what we've experienced even before it got to the courts with a state legislature and a redistricting commission that just chose to thumb their nose at our Constitution. So I do have concerns about what decision they will reach, and also just on the redistricting side in the federal legislator map. I know that they're not happy with the fact that we gained that seat, right? And there's a possibility that there's even the 15th district, which could be a flippable seat if we had a strong candidate. So I don't think that they're going to want to allow that possibility. So I think they're going to be pushing hard at the Supreme Court and our state Supreme Court, and I don't have a lot of confidence. But that's one reason for folks. I know everyone's talking about voting no, and I voted today for the issue 1 election. I do think there's that window that if we show really unexpected and really strong turnout, that particularly those members of the Supreme Court that are up for election will be concerned about really going out on a limb with regard to taking democratic control away from the people. If they see that we're sending this strong message that, yes, we may be this purplish red state, but we are going to turn out and we're going to stand up when our rights are being impacted. So that's just another reason why everyone should get their friends, neighbors, even people
Absolutely.
they don't like, but who vote the right way out to vote.
And that is a really fabulous segue back to our talk about vote no in August. Sorry, my screen does this thing where I have to move my little bar to get back to the slides. There we go. Yes, we all know that issue one is proposing something incredibly unfair, and I agree with Meryl. Thank you so much, Meryl, for joining us. We appreciate hearing from you, and that's very, very interesting. And I also just want to make a comment that it's several times now that the Supreme Court has kind of taken cases and held on to them, and then they send them back after saying, if they had done that earlier, it would have made a huge difference. So, that whole kind of backdoor thing is very disturbing. But anyway, we just have a few minutes now, and I do want to make sure we just share this really important information about voting no. I know everyone on here is with us, but we do want to make sure you have all the information you need. The first thing you need to do is go and early vote. And after 458 passed in January, or was signed in January, we have new early voting hours. And you must remember that there is no longer any early vote on the last day before the election. Here are all the hours. We also want you to get active. Go to Mobilize US and look in your area. And find canvases, find phone banks. Opal is doing a phone bank. Meryl, I think there's one happening right now, in fact. So, it isn't a question of wait for the event to come to you. Find something, get a time on your calendar, say on Thursday afternoon, I'm going to do this. On Saturday afternoon, I'm going to do this, and set that time aside. And there's stuff to do, whether it's calls, letters, all those different things. There's a lot of actions on this campaign link, and there are these rallies coming up around the state. There have been some small press events, but here are 4 big rallies that are coming up, including one tomorrow in Dayton. Catherine is going to be there, along with many others, and it will be a wonderful time. There'll be yard signs there and other swag, so please tell your friends. There's one in Youngstown the next week, and Toledo and Columbus. Vote forward letters. That's a great, easy thing to do. You're writing to infrequent voters. They're nonpartisan letters. They're just informing people about the election. Put up a yard sign. If you don't have one yet, and you go to that link that is there, you can get some information on how to get a yard sign. Spread the word. We have a lot of graphics in this folder here. Take your own photos, whether you're voting or you've got a yard sign, and share those on social media. There's a lot of groups that are posting great information and kind of inspirational stuff on Twitter and other platforms. So there's some links there for those. Common Cause has these really excellent flyers that people are using for canvassing. People I know are going and putting them on windshields, in parking lots. So, whatever it takes, we've got materials for you. We want you to write letters to the editor and let your neighbors know and your community know how you feel about this. Mine plus 9, that means make a plan to vote yourself, and make sure you introduce 9 other people to the importance of voting no on August 8th or before August 8th. So mine plus 9. We have this special election weekend of action is coming up, and it is on Friday. Multiple times available. There's a link there. And this is going to be an excellent event. It's being put together by our old friend Ifeolu Claytor, who used to work with us at All Voting is Local and is now at State Voices. And so if you're in the Cleveland area, definitely check that out. In my opinion, the Ohio Press Corps is like in a competition to see who can write the most scorched earth editorials about how important it is to vote no. Some of the titles, I made a list of the titles today. I don't think I have it here in front of me, but it was like, deceitful hypocrites trying to fool you into voting yes. That's the level at which the editorials are now. So check them out. There's some really powerful words that you can share with your community as well. Take pictures. This is early vote at Franklin County yesterday, first day of early vote, very exciting. There's Tiffany with her vote no selfie box there that she made. Common Cause has a great video that we put together that's 1 minute and 30 seconds long that I'm gonna hopefully play for you right now. Let's see what happens when I click on that. All right, here we go.
There's no sound.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Well, I'll just send you the link and you get the idea. It's a fun little 1 minute and 30 seconds video, and you'll probably see yourselves in some of the crowd scenes if you are at the State House. And that's it. And these are just some links to some, summaries, how to join the campaign, etc. I see there are a few questions in the chat. Catherine, do you want to jump in and answer any of these questions? Or let me see. Majority members of the ORC created their maps behind the scenes and walked into the room. Oh, Catherine, are there
I'm
any
so
questions?
sorry. I could not seem to
Fine.
come off mute. It was like my computer
Fine.
just didn't want to. So I did answer the question about like, well, how the heck do we keep having the Ohio Redistricting Commission essentially ignore what the Ohio Supreme Court did? And it is baffling, but essentially elected officials refuse to follow what Ohio voters approved and put in the Ohio Constitution. And because we went through this, we now know that we actually need to take the map making away from elected officials and create an independent citizens commission. And so it's incredibly challenging. It's like this ongoing fight. It's like we win, and yet we didn't really win, if that makes sense. We won, we got somewhere, but we have to keep fighting. So I think that's just the challenge. And it's one of the reasons why I care so much about making sure we defeat issue 1 so that we can do the signature gathering, so that we can actually put a ballot measure before the voters to put the map making in the hands of an independent citizens commission. Now, Dan is really familiar with independent citizens commissions. Dan, do you want to add anything about that? He's also having trouble with mute.
Yeah, I got it. Just about sort of like what's out there in the States, or what kind of.
Yeah, just to give people an idea, one of the things I've said is, these folks are drunk on power. I got this from Kathy Fung. And what do you do with drunks? You take away the keys. But I think it's helpful for people to think about, like, once we win and we defeat issue 1 of the August special election, once we defeat this attack on direct democracy, what are the next things that we can do so that we actually have fair districts and fair elections?
Yeah, so in several states around the country, most recently, Michigan and Colorado added them. California has a very independent version as well. And what these do is take the power to draw districts completely out of the hands of legislators, give it to a body that's been screened for all sorts of conflicts of interest. It prohibits current and recent elected officials, candidates, political party insiders. You have balanced partisanship, usually, an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and some independents as well. And they're required to draw districts in a transparent process. It prohibits them from having any conversations about drawing maps outside of a public hearing. And it usually works incredibly well. The public has a voice, they tell their stories, and this group of citizens get together and make the best decisions they can based on community interests, not politics, not partisanship. So it's a really great model that's changed the game in terms of redistricting.
And it's something that we dream of for Ohio.
And then Belinda had a question, and it had to do with whether we could actually sue over the transparency. That whole thing of, like, one of the things that we never had kind of a fight with the state legislature or the Ohio Redistricting Commission was about transparency and more transparent map making. And so is that something that has happened nationally? Is that something that is reasonable to consider?
Yeah, I mean, if whatever redistricting body is in charge, legislators, a citizen commission, a politician commission, doesn't adhere to all the requirements that the state constitution, that state law demands of them in terms of openness and transparency, yeah, litigation always remains an option to fix the problem.
And then Matthew is wondering, all right, are we likely to have to go back to the US Supreme Court, with the gerrymandering case? Or is at this point, the US Supreme Court made their decisions and it won't?
Not if there is an argument based on this independent state legislature theory. I don't know if Colin wants to jump in terms of how other ways it may kind of end up in federal court, but in terms of ISLT, that's dead.
And then Mia, what is Vote Forward?
Well, Vote Forward is an organization that it's kind of like writing postcards to voters, but it's writing letters to voters, and the data shows it's a little bit more effective. And they aren't telling you how to vote. They're just information about election, and it's to kind of let people know there's an election and encourage them to get out. And you just share a reason that you care about voting. I care about voting because, and it motivates people to go out and vote. So I think it's a really great organization. I do see Linda Smith's question, and I think that's a great one to leave for a future huddle. Details about how, the nitty gritty about, how do you make those decisions when you're creating a whole plan for an independent redistricting commission? How do you figure out stuff like how do you select the citizens? That's a great question. We have had a few interviews with redistricting commissioners from California and Michigan and Colorado to talk about their processes. And we do have on our YouTube channel, you can actually find the conversations that we've had with those commissioners. But if we were looking forward in Ohio, we would be trying to invent, our own very, very best way to do it. And I think we should do that at a future time.
Yeah, why don't we add the links to those videos to the follow-up? So everybody, you're going to get you're going to get a recording of this. You're going to get the slides. We'll also share some videos from, previous huddles. And of course, we'll send you the video, the Common Cause video with Becky Harper, so you can check that out. And then, I guess the next step is to bid one another adieu and hopefully see one another at the upcoming rallies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. We love sharing our evening with you, and we will see you next month. And many thanks to all our panelists who joined.
A big thank you, Becky. Big thank you, Meryl. Thanks, Dan.
Really nice to meet you all. Thanks for the work you're doing. Meryl, I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Yeah, and I went to law school in North Carolina, so still on my
did you go to Carolina?
possibility list for future domicile.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Duke for law.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
so I have fondness for North Carolina. So
All right, guys.
Thank you all.
bye.
Bye, everybody.
See you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye. Thanks so much.